Good morning or afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are in the world, I suppose. My name is Catherine, and I'm going to chair this session today with my colleagues, Derek and Sean. I can see we've already got quite a number of people on, so I think I will actually just kick off, and obviously more people can join as they wish. So yeah, obviously the session today is about how to get the most out of our TitanHQ SpamTitan product. Now, we'll obviously, we have a full agenda here of things to go through, but we also want to make sure that we are making enough time for questions at the end. So hopefully we'll get that balance right. So just to kick off, I suppose, just to introduce myself and my colleagues. So my name is Catherine McGrath. I am the Customer Success Director at TitanHQ. I have a team of people which some of you may have met. I know I've met some of you myself. I've been with the company a relatively short time, I suppose, compared to the other two, only 2 years. Joining me today are Sean Doherty, who is Head of Product Development, but also a co-founder of the company. And I think Sean has been with us since the very, very start, which is, I think, about 22 or 23 years.
And then my colleague... It's a long time.
A long time, Sean, a long time, not longer than me. So you obviously know what you're talking about. And then our other colleague is Derek. Derek is Director of Technology Operations. Derek was with the company for, I think, 7 or 8 years, and then went away for a year and missed it so much he decided to return recently. So that's Derek, who, as I said, Derek and Sean will run through the lion's share of today's presentation. So just to start then, some housekeeping, I suppose, to make sure you're getting the most out of the webinar. The first thing to be aware of is that there is actually a handout. So for this presentation that we're about to run through, if you can see on the side of your screen on the right-hand side, there is a control panel. And one of the sections in that control panel is entitled Handouts. So if you just click there, you'll see that there is a PDF of this presentation, which you can obviously download. Now, separate to that, any attendees today will also receive an email tomorrow, and that email will have a recording of the session. So that's just in terms of the handouts and the recording. Also regarding questions, you'll also see in that control panel as well, there is a section there entitled Questions. So any questions you'd like to ask, please just submit them in there. Now, we won't take questions throughout the session. We'll take them at the end. And any questions that we don't get to, I'll respond to individually, just to make sure that we're covering everything, and we're covering any topics or any issues that people may have. So I think that's pretty much the boring stuff. So I'll hand you over to my colleague Derek now, who will talk us through the agenda and what we're hoping to get through today.
Yeah, thanks very much, Catherine. And yeah, good morning or good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. It's great to be doing these again. It's been a while since I've been on one of these myself. It's always great to get in front of our customers and bring you through some features and functionality, and give some guidance and answer any questions that you may have. So in regards to today's agenda, we've a fairly packed agenda, which is good. And the presentation itself is very wordy. I would call that out at the start, but that's mainly because we will be, it is downloadable and it will be shared out, and this will be shared out to everybody. So it'll be a good reference guide for yourselves for future, if you're ever looking back or thinking, what did they cover that time, or where was that setting, and so on. So it's more of a reference point. We will be jumping between the PowerPoint and the actual interface of SpamTitan to walk through these as well. So we'll start off with configuring your SpamTitan for optimal performance. So we'll start off kind of like the life journey of an email when it goes through SpamTitan. So when it comes in and the connection level checks, such as RPLs and so on, then our malware detection and sandboxing, and then the spam detection rates as well and aspects around that. Once we've gone through those, we'll go through how to deal with false positives and false negatives. Especially working in the email security world, this is always going to be number 1 and 2 in whichever order. So we'll go through dealing with aspects like false positives and false negatives, how to look at these, how to combat these, how to allow a block, how to change or customize your SpamTitan for your needs. Something I will say, and I'll probably say again later on, spam and malware. So malware is hard defined. Spam is harder to define, you could say, because some people like to receive, say, marketing type emails. Some people hate to receive it, and so on. So that's why you do have the ability, and we'll show you the ability to customize your SpamTitan to your end users, to your domain, to your group of domains, and at a global level as well. And also at the end, there will be time for questions. So we are conscious we want to get to your questions and answering questions to you as well, rather than just myself and Sean speaking to what we have here. We do want to show the question or go through your questions as well. So first of all, so configuring your SpamTitan and making sure it's optimal. So these are some of the aspects that we're going to go through in the interface now. And I'll leave these here. As I said, it's a bit wordy. So we'll go through your RBLs, your real-time black hole lists. These are extremely, extremely effective, and we'd always recommend having these in place. Gray listing, a very good feature as well. Can be, it depends on your business and on your domain and time sensitivity in email for the first little while, but we'll really go into detail in that as well. Geo-blocking, very important as well. Recipient verification and sender controls. So we'll go through all of these now. And these are our frontline tests. So if you're speaking to us in support or in our sales team or in our CS team and so on, you might hear us say frontline support or frontline tests. This would be our frontline test. These are the first initial things that emails will go through when it comes to SpamTitan. So if I jump over to the interface here, this is a demonstration interface that we have for today. So most of these settings or frontline tests are within the system setup and mail relay tab. First of all, our RBL lists. So RBLs are extremely effective. What they are is when a mail hits us, these have a list of known bad sending IPs, and these get blocked on initial contact. This is extremely good. It will block between 10 to 20% of all messages. And when you remove clean messages within coming into a system, you're looking at over 50% of all mail will be blocked by this, and with a little to zero false positive rate on this as well. So they're extremely, extremely effective. In regards to what RBLs to use, there is such a wide plethora of RBLs out there to use. The three that we have here would be three that we would recommend. So zen.spamhaus.org, fantastic RBL. They also do have a paid version of that as well that we can speak about as well. And also Truncate and PSBL. They're very good servers, very good RBLs to be using. Because our frontline tests, as by their name, they're at the front line, it's on the initial contact. Not all of these would actually be quarantined if they are blocked, because there's pretty much no need to be quarantining these types of emails. But if you ever did see a false positive appearing in there, there is a bypass list for each of these settings individually. So you'll see in here the bypass RBL checks here. You would add in the IP or the IPs you would like to bypass RBLs. So any mail coming from that IP would bypass RBL checking, but would still go through everything else. You're just bypassing this one aspect. Again, keeping security at the front of mind. You don't really want to be bypassing everything for anybody at any stage, really. Now, if you do, the most effective way to do that is to add the sending IP to the IP address, allowed IP addresses. This will bypass almost everything in SpamTitan, so please be very wary of adding anything to the allowed IP addresses. But the bypass RBLs is the one to use if you want to bypass RBLs specifically. Then moving along to gray listing. So gray listing is off by default within SpamTitan, but if I enable it here, apologies. Sorry, in gray listing, it looks like this might have been put onto demo mode. Sean, if you have access there, it looks like there might be something going on there. Apologies. So that the joys of a live demonstration. But just while the guys have a look at that there, the gray listing. So gray listing is a very good feature for stopping spam mail, phishing mail, different types of bad mail like that as well, if they're being sent from a clean IP. So it uses a triplet. So it looks for the sender IP address, the sender email address, and the recipient email address. And it looks for these in the headers. So what grey listing does is, when a mail comes to SpamTitan, we will send that mail back to the sending mail server for redelivery. All SMTP compliant mail servers will re-queue that email for delivery. Once that comes in, we will then accept it and process it onwards. The reason this setting is very effective is a lot of, say, the spammers out there and the bad actors out there, their mail servers will not resend because they're just blasting these emails out. They just want to send it out and see if they get people back or people clicking on the links and so on. So it's extremely effective in that because the mail will just be dropped and will never be re-queued. Now, there is a caveat with it. Because we're sending it back to the sending mail server, we are reliant on the sending mail server, how that's configured, when to resend it. So there can be a delay for the first 24 to 48 hours after enabling grey listing for your domains. There can be a delay on emails, and it's impossible to say how long of a delay because it's all dependent on the sending mail server for that particular sender, and they may be different. But as I said at the start, we look for the triplet, the IP address, the sender email address, and the recipient email address. Once we see those three aspects, and we can set that in here as well, but once we see those three aspects, 4 or 5 times by default, but we can lower that, that is then exempt from grey listing. That sender, that recipient, and so on will not go through grey listing anymore. So that's why we say that grey listing will generally only do it for the first 24 to 48 hours because of your especially with your frequent people that you'll be emailing with. There is also a bypass list for grey listing, and apologies there, still can't get in there. There is a bypass list for grey listing as well. So you can add sending email addresses, recipient email addresses, sending domains, and so on in there to bypass grey listing. Just there, Sean, I don't know, have you managed to get that out of demo mode yet?
It is out of demo mode, so I'm not sure what the issue is there, Derek.
Okay, maybe if I log out and log in again, that could be it.
Let me try again. Actually, sorry, I beg your pardon, it is in demo mode.
Apologies, yeah, apologies for that, guys. The joys of everyone on the line, the joys of a live demonstration.
Okay, try again there, Derek.
There we go. Perfect. So in here, I'm just going to enable this so we can see. So as I was saying there, the triplet, once we see that 5 times, that can be edited here. So we can lower that to say 3 times or to 2 times, whatever you would like. I'd recommend 2 at a minimum anyways. And as you can see here, you can add in your exemption list as well. So your recipient, your sender, and your sender IP address. And that does support domains as well. And then after that, what we'll look at is our SMTP settings. So in here, these are very good and these are very effective as well. And again, these are off by default. So in case you have not enabled these yet, what these look for is pretty much SMTP compliancy. So that you do have an A record for your sending server, that you do have a reverse DNS or PTR record for your sending domains or for your sending servers as well. And it also checks the hello headers as well. So these are very effective as well, especially the reject unknown sender domain. That does look for the PTR record. And everybody who is SMTP compliant would have a PTR record in place. If you're using, as you say, our private cloud, that would be part of the initial configuration that would have done with you in creating the PTR record. The next aspect that I'll jump over to is recipient verification. So recipient verification is very effective, say, for dictionary type attacks. It'd also be very, very helpful for keeping your license count very accurate. So what recipient verification does is when a mail comes to SpamTitan for your domains, we will send a probe, it's a microseconds to your mail server, your Office 365, to say, is this a valid email address or not? If it is not, we drop the mail. If it is, we continue to process the mail. So it's a very effective in dictionary attacks and also for your license count. We do support a number of flavors of recipient verification. So dynamic recipient verification is the most commonly used one. This is what to use if you're using 365 as well. And the verification server would be the same as your mail server. So for your Office 365, if you're on it, it should be that FUDN that you use as your destination server. That is what you would use here. If you're on-premise Exchange or G Suite and so on, it would be your IP address of your firewall or FUDN, your firewall on port 25, if it's on-premise Exchange. If G Suite, it would be the G Suite FUDNs in there as well. We do support other flavors as well. So LDAP, if you're on-prem Exchange again, you can put in your LDAP credentials in there and you can change the LDAP port in case you're using LDAP-S. You can specify regular expression. I think I've only ever seen 2 people using that in my 10 odd years here, where you can use regular expression to verify it. And also you can specify requests. So say you're an MSP and one of your customers has 5 users and will only ever have five mailboxes. You could list them in here instead of doing the setup of the recipient verification and so on. So they're all very, very effective settings in there. So the last but not least would be our geo-blocking. So with geo-blocking, by its name, you can add in particular regions or countries to stop mail coming in from. So if you don't do business, say, with Russia or with China or so on, you can add them in here and the status to be blocked. So you won't accept any mail from any IPs originating from those regions. From our own studies and from global studies as well, China is still and continues to be the biggest source of spam globally as well. So it is something to think about when adding in here as well. It is a very, very good effective setting in there. So I hope that quick whistle stop tour in there helps. And again, that's our frontline test. It's not everything. That is our frontline test. The initial settings that mail would go through when it hits SpamTitan. So to our next stage, I might hand over to my colleague Sean for this part. This is our malware and sandboxing detections.
Thanks, Derek, and listen, thanks everybody for joining the webinar today. It's great to see so many attendees, and hopefully you'll get something useful out of the webinar. Some little nugget maybe that you didn't know already about the inner workings of SpamTitan. So after the initial connection checking phase that Derek just went through there, we move on to kind of the malware analysis. Was the first step after we've accepted the message and received the entire body of the message. So once it's gone through those connection level SMT checks, we'll pass the message and the attachments to both their AV scanners in parallel, so Bitdefender and ClamAV. So most of the default SpamTitan AV settings are fine, but there's probably a couple of ones that we maybe want to enable. And I guess the most important of these is sandboxing. We've got this disabled by default, and I guess the reason for that is so that well, it can take maybe up to 20 minutes for a message to be sent to our cloud-based sandbox, be detonated in the sandbox to determine if it's a malware or if it's benign, and before we get a response. So if you've got recipients who have got time-sensitive mail delivery requirements, then you may want to disable the sandboxing for them, and that can be done. Doesn't have to be a global disabling of the sandboxing setting. That can be done on a per policy basis, so you can disable for the entire domain or for individual recipients. So once the sandboxing is enabled, we then need to determine what we send to the sandbox. Now, unfortunately, it's not practical to send every single attachment to the sandbox that passes the AV scans, because otherwise we would have, huge mail delays and customers be waiting for their mails at least 20 minutes. So we only can basically send a subset of the attachments. So we've got a pre-filter sandbox module, which basically determines and identifies suspicious messages which have malware markers within them, and they're sent to the sandbox for analysis and detonation. And even then, with all the samples that we send to the cloud-based sandbox, probably 99% of all samples we send come back as benign. It's only going to be a very, very small fraction that actually are malware. So I'll show you those AV settings in a minute. Derek will go on to the UI in a minute. But before we get on there, Derek, maybe we'll briefly go through the spam settings, and we can just kind of maybe discuss those rather than jumping back and forth from the deck to the UI. So if you want to move on there, Derek. So once we've determined that a message is free from malware, we have to find out is it a spam message or not. We've got a huge arsenal of tests for determining this. There's no one test that is the go-to test for determining if a message is spam or not. And I think this will be typical probably for all spam filtering vendors. As Derek mentioned there, the frontline checks and the URBL checks, they're great for maybe blocking up to 50% of all malware messages or spam messages at the connection phase. And that's great because it's a very quick decision, doesn't involve any expensive CPU compute or anything like that. Spam analysis, though, is computationally expensive, but we've got an array of tests to run through. Probably the most important one is probably our heuristic rule analysis engine. We've got thousands kind of rules that have built up over the years. They're being continually tweaked and added to help us achieve a higher catch rate. We also perform Bayesian analysis on messages. So this essentially works by splitting messages into tokens, and based then on the contents of our Bayesian database, we can determine with a level of probability that a message is spam or not. So that can contribute to the spamminess, the spam score, or the spam threshold of a message, and also to the other side. If it's a clean message, it can give a negative score to a message to help us push it in the other direction. The Bayesian engine itself is auto-trained as messages are received, although be aware that not all messages go through the auto-learning. They need to meet some minimum requirements, some minimum criteria before that happens. And we also have then the ability for your end users or admins to contribute to the training. So for instance, every time a end user releases a message from the quarantine, that message is then put into a queue for training with our Bayesian engine, so that's learned as a clean mail. So then if any future messages with the same kind of attributes and same kind of tokens comes in, it will trigger Bayes in a negative fashion rather than pushing the score upwards. One thing to be careful of here, though, with that kind of power, users can release spam messages from the quarantine as well. So when they get their quarantine report, or when they're in the console, maybe they're not sure if a message is a clean message or a spam message. So it's always advisable to look at the spam score. If it's a very high scoring spam message, you don't want to release it, because all that's going to do is that's going to be put into the queue for training as a spam message, and that'll basically push that Bayesian message or any messages with those attributes to be trained as spam in future. Just something to be aware of there. There's a couple of other kind of ones I've just highlighted here. Like I say, these are just a subset of some of the tests that we perform when we're analyzing a message. One of the ones we have here is botnet analysis. So we basically kind of review all the kind of received headers in a mail message, look at the IP addresses, and with some various DNS tricks, we can determine if that's a source of a botnet attack or not. We perform URL reputation analysis. So every link in a message is subject to URL or URIBL checks. So there's several URIBL lists that we use, as well as our own proprietary one. And that also includes as well the ability to follow URL shorteners. We'll see in a minute that there's an option in the UI if you want to enable that or not. There's cases where you may not want to do that, but I'll discuss those in a minute. And then, like I say, that's just a subset of the tests we perform. Some of the other ones we perform, we've got fuzzy checksum matching, where basically we, calculate a checksum of some of the common components of an email message. So even if a spam campaign, changes some of the text or some of the attributes, the fuzzy checksum should always remain the same, and we check to see if it's matches there, that'll hit there. It's also quite effective. We've got a feature called Pen Pals. This may not be applicable to all of you, because Pen Pals is only effective if you're processing both inbound mail and outbound mail. So the way this works is, we kind of learn the patterns of who you're sending to and who your senders are replying to. So when we see back and forth communication, we know that they're obviously legitimate mails, and again, they can contribute to the cleanliness of a message. In terms of, we mentioned there, URLs and messages. We also have a feature for SpamTitan Plus, which is a link rewriting. So this is basically a feature to basically add in layers of defense. So the intent here is that, should any message get past our filters and end up in your user's inbox, at the time of click, we recheck the reputation of that URL. So, when we're processing the message, it could be that there's a benign reputation on the URL. When the user comes into their, office or desk or whatever in the morning, open up the email, we've all the links rewritten. So they'll be rewritten. When they click on it, they'll be redirected to one of our link block cloud-based service. We'll recheck the reputation of that URL. And if it's benign, we'll automatically redirect the user to the original URL. But if it now has a poor reputation, then we'll block them from going there and prevent them from potentially, downloading some malware. And then on top of that, then we've got some anti-spoofing features in there as well. So, that's both on anti-spoofing based on the domain and also on the display name. So, if you've got, Bill Gates or whatever there as your CEO, we can have the ability to, see if somebody comes in with B Gates, or there's kind of fuzzy checks on matching on the username, so that we'll find variations of that name coming in. And if it's being impersonated incorrectly, we'll flag that and block those messages as well. So Derek, if you want to fly over to the UI, we'll just run through maybe some of the virus settings and some of these spam settings which we just discussed.
Yeah, and just to add to what Sean was saying there, a question we get asked quite a bit in support would be, I've added an email address or a domain to my allow list. Why is it still getting blocked? Say, as using an example here now, as a banned attachment or something like that. When you add a sender email address or domain to the allow list, these are the settings it bypasses. Everything we've showed up to now, including the antivirus, an allow list, an email address or domain does not bypass those. It does bypass the spam analysis and the spam analysis only. Just a good one to know. Perfect. Just continue.
Thanks, Derek. So yeah, like as I was mentioning, most of the settings for the virus settings and the spam settings, we're good to go with the out of the box settings here. There's a couple of settings there at the top. Notify intended recipient, notify administrator. I think we have those options in there, but I very rarely see anybody enable those options, to be honest. It's just kind of contributing to the problem where, the cure is worse, or the cure is worse than the initial problem if you're going to be notifying everybody every time there's a message blocked as malware. If you want to scroll down a little bit more though, Derek, there's a couple of options here for ClamAV, which are kind of useful though, and in particular the last one there, the treat OA macros as, and you have two options here, or three options I think. We can do nothing, and just if there's no ClamAV definition for a sample, then we just pass it back and move on to the next stage of the analysis. We can treat it as a virus. We can contribute to the spam score, and again, we'll move on to the next stage and add on some points to the score if there's any OLE macros in it, or we can send it to the sandbox for analysis. There's pros and cons again with all these. I suppose one thing I think we're recommending customers to do recently is to set this setting to virus. I think we're kind of seeing more and more malware coming in with OLE attachments. Microsoft, I think last year by default now they're blocking any Word or Excel documents with the OLE macros, so there's no reason why we shouldn't do the same at the spam filter level. And then on Bitdefender, as I mentioned already, we've got the sandboxing is off by default, so make sure you turn that on. Cloud protection is also turned off by default. This is basically where we send random samples of the samples that were being analyzed by the Bitdefender AV engine are sent to the Bitdefender cloud servers for post-analysis, and that can help with reducing zero-day malware attacks. So then on the spam settings, Derek, if you want to move on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've again, like I say, we've got a whole array of kind of tests which are performed. These network-based tests, we've got Razor, Pfizer. Derek talked earlier on about the frontline connection level RBL checks that are performed. We also perform RBL checks when we're analyzing a message. So obviously, every message will have received headers of the chain of hops that the message went through before it arrived at SpamTitan. So we'll analyze each of those headers and the IP addresses, more to the point, to see if they're on any RBL list. It's not going to be a black or white decision like the frontline test that Derek was talking about, but it will help contribute to the score if we see that some of the hops that a message went through is on an RBL list. That might add 1-2 points to the score for that message. If you want to scroll a bit down further, Derek, some of our base settings here. Again, these are pretty much set and forget settings. I mentioned earlier on that auto learning is enabled by default, but it doesn't apply to all messages. You have to hit certain criteria. So for a message, for instance, to be classified as a clean message, it has to have a score of less than 0.1. And if it has to be classified for auto learning as spam, it has to have a score above 10. Now, it's very rarely that we would see a legitimate mail score above 10. Even about 7 or 8 is probably quite rare. Usually, any of the false positives you'll see would be always around the 5, 5.5, around that kind of area. And we mentioned also again, that the possibility that users can, taint the database by releasing spam messages and such. They will be used for training the database. So from time to time, you may need to kind of reset the Bayesian database, and in here is the place you would do that. A couple of more tests we have here. Then we've got the pen pals. Again, I think it's disabled by default. But again, the score here isn't going to be a flat 3 as you see here. It's going to be based on a kind of a varying number based on that, whether depending on how much correspondence you've had with a particular sender. Again, botnet analysis, again, I think it's turned off by default. No reason not to turn any of these settings on. These should always be on. The same with the fingerprint analysis. The OS fingerprint analysis is basically the intent here is that if we're seeing connections come in from, say, a Windows 10 device or Windows NT or something like that, that's not your typical kind of computer or server that's going to be acting as a mail relay or a mail server. So we'll know at a high degree of probability that that's probably a machine that's been compromised and it's just spewing out spam. So that's just kind of a kind of flavor of some of the kind of tests that we perform, during the spam analysis stage.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Sean. So back to our wordy PowerPoint. So now we're moving on to the next stage of the agenda, which would be how to deal with false positives and false negatives. We'll tackle both of these together and how to identify these and how to combat these as well. So we have a number of mechanisms in here, and we're going to start off. I might take a bit, and Sean might take a bit as well. But we'll look at this from false positives, false negatives, how to combat both of these. If your customers or your users are raising these as a concern. So there's quite a lot in here, but what I might do is concentrate on the UI and actually the hands-on how to combat these. But as a high level, so review why messages that were allowed or blocked. How in SpamTitan, why does SpamTitan allow this, or why does SpamTitan block it? And I'll show you how to analyze that. Maybe we might need to have a look at the SPF, the DKIM, the DMARC record, something on those lines. As Sean mentioned there, the Bayes database. I'll actually show you now how to see if the Bayes database is what's called poisoned or if it's in a good state. What it can do is add a higher score where it shouldn't be, and I'll show you how to identify that. And then allow and block lists. We've got multiple levels of allow and block lists. So you've got your global level, your domain group level, your domain level, and your user level. So you can go at each of those levels as well. Again, back to what I said earlier, one person might want to receive the LinkedIn notifications, someone else may not. So one person might block that, one person might allow that. So that's where you get that level of granularity in there as well. Then review your filtering policy. So fine-tuning your filtering policy, your filtering threshold, that is actually very, very valuable and a good thing to show. I'll go into detail on that. And then if all else fails, our support team are always here to help, always here to help you out in cases like this. What always helps our support team get to the issue faster and resolve it faster for you, or give you the recommendations or put the actions in place for you, is examples. Once you have if you have a few examples, say 2 to 3 examples, the more the better. Depends how you look at that. But if you give that to our support team, that gives them a lot of information to dig in, see exactly what's going on, see if there's any correlation between them, and really get really granular on what we can do there. So I'll delve into these now. So when you have your, as you know, you've got your mail up and running, you're using SpamTitan, probably the most powerful or most used tab within SpamTitan is the reporting and history tab. This tells you everything about what's going on with the email coming through, as you know. So when you come through here, this will show you all mail that was blocked by RBLs and what RBLs blocked it, whether it was clean, whether it was banned, whether it was virus, whether it was clean, whatever that might be. So in here, you can search. So as your recipient, your sender, and then you can really get granular in here, but you can search for, say, just spam email. So let's have a look. Let's do that. We'll just go. I just want to see spam email, and you'll see the date range here as well. So set to the last 7 days. So as you can see, there's a lot of mail in here. So I'm going to say, just for absolute, we'll take this one. So we'll say, okay, why was this blocked? Let's pretend this is a false positive. Why was this blocked? So I would click on that mail, and this shows me the overarching headers. So our spam threshold is 5 by default, and I can see this scored 6, so I want 1 point above it. If I drill into the view source, there's a header in here that is very valuable for this. So in here we'll say X spam status header yes. So X spam status was yes. It is the status of this is yes, it is a spam email. It scored 6, and these are the tests that triggered in there. So there are thousands of tests behind the scenes in here. On our docs portal, we do have a list of all them there. And we also incorporate spam assassin rule sets and a number of others. So a lot of the time, pasting these into Google will bring them back to it, probably bring back our docs portal as well. But we can see, and this may not be a great one, I want to find one with the Bayes kicking in, but you can see there's Razor. That's a good one. Sean spoke about Razor. So there's IPs in there that it's 100% sure is a bad IP. So it's adding 2.4, which is nearly 50% of your way to your spam already. You can see CAN DMARC quarantine. So the DMARC record is incorrect in it. So that's what's triggering as well. And Razor, another IP checker kicking in. So you can see all these are kicking in to block that email. Pick another one here. Botnet. As Sean mentioned there, all the IPs are checked in the headers by botnet. Botnet triggered in here. That's a good score of 3.5. So it's always good to see these. But something to keep an eye out in here would be if you see the likes of a Bayes or anything like this. So you'll see, instead of botnet here, you would see Bayes underscore and a number. That number represents how sure Bayes is that this mail is spam or clean email. So Bays_99 means Bays is 99% sure that this mail was a spam email. So if you're seeing that header or that spam test trigger on false positives, it means most likely your Bayesian database has been poisoned by maybe end users releasing spam by mistake in their quarantine report or a number of other things, but that's generally the root of it. So if you are seeing that, you can come in here to the anti-spam engine settings tab and you can expire your Bayes database. So that'll expire all old tokens. I'd always recommend starting with an expire. So it'll get rid of the old tokens and start learning. It'll keep the last, I believe, 12 hours of tokens, but it'll expire everything previous to that. And it'll start learning about your mail processing again. Generally, it's up to full speed in 24 hours. If you're still seeing it happening and seeing that in there, the Bayes_99 say, that means, okay, those tokens were added in that 12-hour period. They expired, didn't quite catch that. What you can do is reset. You can actually reset. That will clear out Bayes completely. And it will start learning. Again, 24 hours will be fully up and running. So an expire will get rid of old tokens. A reset will get rid of all tokens and start again. That is a very common reason for false positives. That is something to look at. Other aspects like that, if you're not seeing Bayes scoring, if you're not seeing anything that the sender actually is putting in that's very spammy, like lots of money or something like that, that could obviously add scores as well. But what you can do then is your allow list. You can add senders and sending domains to your allow list. So if there's a sending domain that you do a lot of business with, and you trust that partner, or that customer, or that third party, you can add them to the allow list. So you can add them here to the global allow list, and so this will apply to all your customers immediately, regardless of their settings. This takes precedence, so that'll take place. But again, as I said earlier, you've got 4 levels of this. You've got your global level, you've got your domain group level, where it will apply to multiple domains. You've got your domain level, so it applies to that specific domain. And then you've got your user level, so it will apply to that specific user. Again, if they like to receive those emails or not. So that is always very effective in there as well. And again, if you're still unsure and you're thinking, I'm not sure about this one, it's kind of a borderline one, absolutely. Have it even before that, whenever you would like, contact our support team. More than happy to help out there as well. So then, if it's the opposite way around, if it's a false negative, I always get confused: false negatives, false positives. Especially going back to COVID times, I think we're all kind of sick of those words from those days as well. But let's not mention that. So what we would do here is, what I'd always recommend doing is fine-tuning your spam score. So if you're seeing false negatives, we could fine-tune your spam threshold. So your spam threshold is here on the anti-spam engine domain policies. So there's a domain level threshold. As you can see, here's the number here, and I'll delve into it in a bit more detail in a moment. And you can also do it at a user level as well. You can set these at both those levels. So to do this, what I always recommend starting off doing is in here, in your reporting and history, under your score, you can put in a range. So I'm going to put in a range here of 4.6 and then comma to 5. So I want to see all mail that came in, and let's say just clean email that scored between 4.6 and 5 for the last 7 days, apply. So it's going to go and search all that. So we have purposely put in mail in this band as well. So I would review these, so I can look at the subject line within here. So I can expand that and have a look. And straight away, me personally, as soon as I see emojis and things like that in the subject line, I go, yeah, that's stuff I don't want to be getting. But you can do a review of this, and you can say, okay, everything I'm seeing there, I would classify as spam or mail that I do not want to receive. And just to note as well, a lot of scores added 0.001. So you can get granular in here. You could go 6.1 or so on like that. So as you can see here, it's 4.835. You get extremely accurate in here if you wanted to. But if you're seeing, so this one is good, 4.6 to 5, that's all spam. I do not want to be receiving that type of email. That tells me I need to change my spam threshold to 4.6. And again, you can keep tweaking that. If you're saying, oh, there's actually a little bit of clean email in there, you could go 6.5 and apply, and say, okay, now that's all spam. So the lower the number, that's the number to use as your threshold. So in here, for my domain, menlopark.ie, I am going to edit this policy and change my threshold. So you can see, consider mail spam when scores greater than to 4.65, because I have proved in my actual data that anything that scored above 4.65 and 5, which was my old threshold, was spam. So I'm going to apply that, and that will apply to everybody in that domain. So all mailboxes in that domain immediately. That is.
Excuse me, Derek. Sorry, it's Catherine
Yes.
here. Sorry to just cut in, just doing a time check because we do want to make sure that we have enough time for questions. Thanks, Derek.
Lovely, no problem. We're nearly done. Good on you, Catherine. It's always important. We can't lose track of that very easily. So for false negatives, that is a very effective way Again, you've got your block lists. And what I might do is there is another aspect that Sean is going to jump into that I do want to touch on. We probably, apologies, Sean, we might keep it to 4 to 5 minutes if we can. Apologies, that's my fault probably. But we do want to touch on pattern filtering and content filtering in regards to false positives and false negatives.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I think as Derek says, the allow lists, be it the IP allow list or the email or domain allow list or block list, they're good for certain use cases, whereas there might be other cases where you want to use the pattern filters or the content filters to block spam, because you may not want to skip spam checks for all mails from a certain IP address or all mails from a certain domain. And one of the questions I suppose we get asked quite a bit is, what is the difference between pattern filters and content filters? They're quite similar. There's kind of subtle differences between the two of them, I guess, though. The content filters are only available at the global system level, and they're probably less useful from a point of view of dealing with false positives and false negatives. They can do that, but they've got so many more actions associated with them, such as adding a blind carbon copy user or redirecting to a different mail relay, or even deleting the message. So there's lots of different things you can do with the content filters that you can't do with the pattern filters. The pattern filters, though, are ideal for dealing with those kind of pesky kind of messages which are always getting past the filters, either as false positives or false negatives, where you can basically guide the score in the right direction. And the other benefit of the pattern filters, they are available at the global level, but they're also available at the per domain level as well. So it gives you kind of a much better granularity of how you can control those. So if we have a bit of time, Derek, maybe we'll quickly run through how we set up maybe the same regular expression, say, for both a pattern filter and for a content filter, and see how the kind of difference between the two of them may be.
Sure.
So if you go, say, Derek, to the pattern filtering page there, we might create a pattern filter first of all. So let's maybe see if we can create a message for, I don't know, let's call it, let's say the subject contains a regular expression. Let's say it contains the string amazing deals, some random text, and then maybe an exclamation mark or two at the end. Because again, obviously the spammers, they do change the subjects and they do change the body content in order to try and evade these kind of checks. So this is where the regular expression kind of checks are quite useful, because they allow us basically to kind of capture kind of similarities in mails that may be in the same spam campaign. So if you basically maybe apply that to a header, maybe the subject, I'm going to send a test mail once you create that to the system, and we'll just see what happens there. And this particular pattern filter is being applied at the global level, so it'll apply to all domains. You might have to turn off grey listing there, Dirk, because I'm being grey listed at the moment.
We haven't recognized the triplet yet. Perfect, yeah.
Okay, let me just try again to send my message. Oh, no, it's not liking that. Okay, well, let me just kind of maybe just walk through what would happen here. So essentially, if this was a hard block, we'll get a score of 100 applying to this message. It'll end up in the user's quarantine, and then obviously in the user's quarantine will allow the users to basically, release it if they consider it to be a false positive. With the content filter, on the other hand, the options are slightly different. So it's not like a hard block or a soft block. If we want to block a message because it's a false negative, the option will be to basically delete the message. So if you go down to the inbound actions there, Derek, I think we might see it there a bit clearer. So we've got an array of different options here. One of the nice features here we have here as well with the content filter, you can test out your regular expressions up there as well to make sure you've got it right before you kind of hit the save button. And that's useful just for maybe basically making sure you've got the correct regular expression in there. So as soon as you see it matches, it'll go green. So yeah, the subtle difference here though is, yes, you'll still block the mail with the content filter, but because we're doing a delete, this won't end up in the user's quarantine. It'll just be rejected, and they won't see it. You'll see it in the history, and you'll see it in the history as being blocked by a content filter, whereas the pattern filter will say it was blocked as spam. And that's pretty much the subtle difference that we have there. But yeah, great tools, both them, content filter or pattern filters. Again, we'd probably recommend the pattern filters more so than the content filters, just for dealing with those nasty mails that are always getting through. So maybe Catherine, I don't know, have we got time for any questions?
Yeah, and even, I don't know how people, I'm just keen, there are a lot of questions coming through here, and there are, some common themes. So I'll try to pick the ones that are kind of coming through most prevalently. So even if we do, I don't know, obviously people have schedules and stuff, but we might go 5 minutes over because I think there probably is value in going through those questions. So the first one here, Derek or Sean, I don't know which one of you wants to take it. For geo-blocking, would you recommend a site level or global level?
I can do that one, Derek, I guess. I suppose it depends on who's being affected. Or, if you're an MSP with multiple customers, then you probably don't want to just kind of blatantly geo-block, China, because some of your customers might be doing business with Chinese customers. So it really is a case-by-case basis. And, if one of your customers has no dealings with a certain territory, or they're seeing spam from a certain territory, they don't want to kind of, populate their quarantine reports, unnecessarily with those messages, then for that customer, it's probably better just to do it there.
Okay, perfect. Let's just see, there's a few other ones that are coming up here. How do we block all versions of the Emotet malware?
Yeah, that's a great question. I might take that one as well, Derek.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the Emotet malware. It's been doing the rounds for the last couple of years, and it seems to kind of go through phases where, it's been kind of knocked down and derailed, and botnets are taken offline, which kind of sees it kind of go off the radar for a while. But it's kind of come back with a vengeance, I think, over the last couple of months. It's a very sophisticated piece of malware which is continually morphing, and the writers of the malware are obviously very talented, because they're always coming up with new ways to kind of evade the AV scanners. No sooner do the AV companies have a signature for a new strain than a new one is created. Now, while we have the sandbox functionality, as we mentioned a little earlier, we have a pre-filter. There's going to be cases where the pre-filter doesn't always send a sample to the sandbox for analysis. So, what we would recommend there, as I mentioned earlier on, actually, we probably want to make sure that we've got that setting enabled to have only macros being blocked by ClamAV. There's no reason in this day and age that somebody should be sending those macros or those documents containing macros. So yeah, block it there. Now, one thing actually our threat analysis team has seen over the last couple of months is, you know, the authors of this malware, they've kind of changed their tactics as well. So instead of sending the payload in a Word document or an Excel document, they're using Microsoft OneNote files, and that's obviously to evade both the kind of checks that we're doing to block OLE macros and the checks that Microsoft is doing to do the same. So I guess until Microsoft basically do something on their end to block these, we'd recommend that we go and block the OneNote files using the banned attachment policies within the product. So you can basically block on the extension. And I think the OneNote extension is probably .one. So that's probably the best advice for that one. Yeah,
great. Thanks, Sean. I know there's another one here that I know that the team get quite a bit. Can I have quarantine reports run multiple times per day?
You took the last two, Sean. I'll jump in here on this one. So by default, SpamTitan generates quarantine reports once a day. That can be what time of the day. That can be set on the interface from the quarantine settings tab. By default, it's 5 minutes past 3 a.m. Server time. So it'll send once a day by default using that setting. You can request a report. So users from their quarantine report, they can request an on-demand report as many times as they would like throughout the day from their quarantine report. There's a link at the bottom that says, send me a new report now containing all messages or new messages since last report. They click on one of those two links and they'll receive a new quarantine reports within about 5 to 10 minutes because it has to gather that data in the server or servers and send it to that end user. There used to be a way of editing kind of behind the scenes in a cron tab to send it multiple times a day. We have seen, because that's a custom modification, we have seen that it can cause issues. As you all know, making custom modifications things can cause strange issues because it doesn't go through Q&A a lot of the time and so on. Now, it is something the guys are looking at as well. But as it stands, we send one a day by default, and users can request on-demand reports as many times as they would like throughout the day.
Perfect. Just another question here in relation to for RBL bypass, would it be recommended to do on a global level or individual site level?
So I'll take that. We'll go 2 and 2, I suppose. So RBL bypass IPs, that is that isn't at the site-by-site level at the moment. It is at a system level. So it is at the system level at the moment.
Okay, perfect. We've seen some spoofing mail slip through. How do you best deal with that?
Yeah, so spoofing can be tricky, but there are mechanisms in there. So your SPF, make sure SPF, DMARC, DKIM, utilizing those to their capabilities is always important for those. I recommend that across the board. And we do have another feature there called display name spoofing. So that's what's very commonly used. People don't really spoof, well, they do still, but the more sophisticated attackers would edit the display name rather than the actual email address, because most people have SPF and DMARC and DKIM and things like that nowadays. So what they're actually doing is editing the display name. So as Sean said earlier on, you receive an email. I don't know, I'm like this as well. I look at the name, the display name shows up on Outlook or whatever you use, Thunderbird, whatever you might be using. The display name shows up. That's what you're going on. So that's what they're editing. So within SpamTitan, on the anti-spam engine user policies tab, you can edit any users. We generally recommend starting at your C-suite and working way down because they're the core focus of the target. Find your, say your CEO is Bill Gates. You can edit Bill Gates's email address and push in his display name. So Bill Gates. So any sender who sends an email into your domain via SpamTitan with the display name Bill Gates, and it's not from that email address of Bill's, it would be blocked. Again, there's a very small chance of false positives there, because if there's a genuine Bill Gates emailing in from another email address, it would be marked as spam, but it would show up in your quarantine report for release if needs be. But it would show you the email address as well as the display name there.
Great. Just one final one then, probably been a bit tricky trying to sneak this in, but anyway, some astute attendee noticed that we were using version 8 of SpamTitan, and they're just mentioning that their appliance is on 7.13, so with no updates available. Why would that be?
So I'm guessing that person's one of our gateway customers. So I guess the short answer to that is, our AWS private cloud customers, they're all on version 8.0.0, which basically is same as 7.13, except it's on a newer version of the operating system. We have a new ISO image coming out in the next month or so, which will have, again, the latest version of the OS. That'll be version 8.0.0, and that'll be available to our gateway customers then.
Great. That's great. Thanks, Sean and Derek. Just conscious now that we're a minute past the hour. What I will say to everybody is we did receive an awful lot of questions, and we didn't get to go through all of them. So I will reach out individually to answer those questions. So don't worry if you did ask a question and we didn't get to it, we will respond. So apart from that, I'd just like to thank everybody for attending today. I know everybody's busy with their daily schedules. You will receive a survey on the exit. So if you could complete that, we'd really appreciate it. What we're trying to do, we're planning on running more of these webinars. So, we'll probably be doing them every 2 months or so. So we really want to get your feedback in terms of what you found valuable, what you didn't like, what you might like to see in the future. So please, complete the survey and do let us know. Like I said, I will get back to anybody whose question wasn't answered. We will follow up on that, and also you will receive an email tomorrow which will have the recording of this session, so you can look through it again, and if you have further questions. So that's it, everybody, and thank you so much for your attention, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.